7 here, managing users in our own DB set, right? In parallel, working along with the identity system itself, right? By the way, I just have a note here. We're going to actually add push notifications at the same time in terms of our model classes. We will soon be doing a learning moment on finishing the functionality, getting push notifications added to our app and its capabilities. So I figure it makes more sense to actually just add these additional properties to the classes now. We'll come back in the next learning moment to actually get them up and working, right? But that's why you'll see a few things added here related to push notifications. Okay. Now I just thought to make it a little bit more full-featured and so on, we might add some of those things we kind of hinted at in terms of where the administrator might want to set certain properties about a employee or whatever term you want to use, staff user, whatever, right? So we're going to add an enumeration for first aid level of training and maybe a few other things as well, just to give us something to really identify with when we talk about that kind of feature. Okay, so let me just move this off to the side for a second. Now, what I'm working with here, this is the medical office example as we left it off after our learning moment 2, right, where we had our rich text anyway. All right, so that's the one that I'm using as the starting point here. So I'm going to come to Models folder. I'm going to add, first of all, a class here for the enumeration for the first aid qualifications, right? So I'm just going to call it first aid. That'll just be a public enum. There we go. So we have our level 1, 2, and 3, okay? And away we go. All right. Now I'm going to actually add the employee class itself. That'll be the next thing. So this is the one that's going to work in parallel to our identity user class, right? I'll just call it employee. Okay. Now, let me just copy paste so I don't mess it up. Okay. We're going to make it auditable, among other things, right? So we'll inherit from auditable. Again, the usual arrangement here. We'll have our integer identity primary key. I've got a summary property, basically the full name, a formal name, the phone number put together, you know, with the proper formatting for display and so on. And I skipped the middle name. We just have first name, last name, phone. Okay, oh, here's another, a prescriber. Remember, this is our medical office. Okay, prescriber status, can this person write a prescription, right? And that's going to be a true or false if they are authorized to do that. Another example, there's our first aid training level, right? So these are things that the admin user should be able to change, but clearly the user themselves shouldn't be able to go in and say, hey, I can write prescriptions, right? No, that's not up to the individual, right? Of course, here's our email. Now notice it's required, okay? And we'll make sure that we make it unique as well. We'll do that in the Fluent API. Here's another one, a Boolean active. So I'm just setting that to true as we first create the record, but it means in future we'll be able to distinguish, maybe just set that to false, and then in our link queries where we go to get employees, we can just make sure that normally we just filter for only active employees, right? Now this subscription, this is for push subscriptions. So that's why I mentioned we're going to get some models in place here, planning ahead for our actual push notification system. We'll talk more about that soon, but for now, let's just get this code in place here. Okay, push notifications, if you're not aware, basically you create a subscription identified by these particular properties. Basically, a user subscribes for push notifications from a given browser and so on and so forth, right? And we're going to relate it back to the employee themselves, right? That's why we have the foreign key here to go along, of course, with the iCollection of subscriptions inside the parent object here in this one-to-many relationship, because an employee might have many subscriptions. Okay, more about that to come. Ooh, I'm building your excitement, I hope. All right, well, that's good enough for now. Let me just save all that. Let's come up to our data folder, and we'll go into our actual medical office context, right? So we're going to add a couple of new DB sets here, one for the employees and one for the subscriptions. Okay, And the only thing we really need to add in the Fluent API is that unique constraint. Very important, right? We must have a unique constraint on the actual email. Okay, so our employee email must be unique. And that's so that we can confidently relate the employee email to the email used to identify the identity user. Okay? All right, now I have a warning here in my copy paste file. All right, let me just bring it over. Be careful. When you see data, we need an admin user, an employee, to match the admin account, right? Otherwise, we don't have anybody who's going to be authorized by the time we're done here to actually go in and create users and set their authorization levels and so on and so forth. So, you know, that's something else we have to think about doing here, right? So I'm going to go to my seed data here in my initializer, and we're just going to add that in. I might even do that here in seeding required data, right? I'm going to add a few employees. Now, by coincidence, okay, you'll see that the ones I'm going to do here actually correspond to the roles, okay? Remember, just let me bring up here our application DB initializer, right? In the sample data we seeded, we created an admin, okay? User, admin at Outlook. We created super at Outlook, user at Outlook, right? So we made all those in the identity system. So you'll notice that's what I'm doing here. I'm giving them names, but that's okay. Okay, so the email is admin, super, and user, right? The most important one is, of course, to have somebody who's an admin, right? So now I have some parallel records created in both the identity system, and you see I'm giving them full names here, right? Which is a nice thing. Okay, now we either need to delete and recreate the migration, or I could be lazy and just tell it to use the ensure deleted approach. Okay, yeah, I made the migration, so I decided to go that route. So I have a new migration here to create the employee table, subscription table, and so on and so forth. All right, so that'll be applied next time I run because I have it set here to use migrations. I don't need to delete the database. It'll just be able to apply the migration, and away we go. Okay, that should be fine. So I'm ready to carry on. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of view models, right? But you know what? We've learned about metadata classes, right? And how they're good for the don't repeat yourself principle. So what I'm going to do before I even get into the view models is I'm going to come in to my employee class. I'm going to copy, Control C, Control V, and then rename this one metadata. Sure, don't call it meat data. Okay. And the metadata class does not need to inherit from Audible, right? And, you know, it's not the end of the world if I didn't remove these, but basically I don't need any properties in here that do not have annotations or relate in some way to or depend on other properties, right? So I'll leave all those. The active, there's no annotations there. I can get rid of both of these. Okay, everything else is supplying metadata, so I'm going to leave them in place, right? That's my metadata class. Good. So when we come back to employee, and I will decorate this so that it will actually apply the metadata coming from my new metadata class, okay? And that does allow me to come in here and take out, clean up, so to speak, the different annotations that I no longer need. Because it'll get them in one place from my metadata class. And if I ever want to modify them, I can just go in to the metadata class and do it there. Okay. All right. So that just cleaned that up a little bit as well. Good. So I have that done. Now, one reason for doing that is I'm going to be able to apply that metadata to my new view models as well, right? So remember, the idea is we want to have, yes, right now the employee class has got everything in here. Some things that only the admin should be able to change, like a prescriber, Boolean, the first aid, the active, and so on. But some things we want to let the user go in and maybe keep up their phone number, or, if we wanted to, we could add, as I said, emergency contact information, things like that, right? Okay, so we're going to add the two view models now. So I'll do that in the view models folder to be consistent. So I'm going to add a class here called simply employee VM for view model, right? Employee view model, okay? Now, let me just add a summary property here. Just to remind me of what we're doing, I'm going to leave out properties that the employee should not have access to change, right? Other than that, it's going to have most of the ones that are in the actual employee class, right? So let me just copy and paste here. I could have actually made a copy of employee and saved some time that way, but I have it in my copy paste file. So still, I have my same summary property here. Oh, don't forget, I also want to make sure that I'm getting my metadata, right? So I'll add that up here as well. Oh, not as part of the summary comment. There we go. Just add the using. No big deal. I shouldn't have paused recording, but I actually had to add not just the model's namespace, because that's where this metadata class is, but I actually had to add this namespace as well, because that's where model metadata type comes from, and it just wasn't here yet. So there we go. So we've added that, so now we can apply the metadata to this class. So we have our same properties here, summary, our formal name, phone number, right? We have the first, last, and phone, okay? So think of this kind of like a DTO, only it's not for transferring data down to a client. This is going to be the view, so to speak, of the employee record that will be available to the employee themselves, so they can maintain this information. So, maybe they get married and need to update their last name, right? Then we're going to make it possible for them to go in and do that themselves, right? Okay, now one other thing I threw in here that I need in this view model is the simple count of the number of subscriptions they have, right? And that's something that we'll be adding later on. But for now, it can just sit here, and we're not really using it for anything, but we have it in place. All right, so that is basically the version of the employee that the employee can maintain themselves for the most part, right? Let's add another view model now. This one will be for the administrator, right? So I'm going to call it employee admin view model. Okay, and it will inherit from employee view model. So basically, it'll have all of these properties, so we can just store in here the extra ones that are unique and only available to be changed or modified by the actual administrator, right? So what's going to go in here? Well, first of all, let me get my okay. Yeah, see, it just added the usings for me that time. I guess it was the summary comments were confusing it. And I'm going to put some summary comments here, though, anyway. Right? We're going to add back in any restricted properties and the list of user roles as well, right? So what goes inside here? Just the things that the admin alone should have access to. The email address, the prescriber status, Boolean, true or false, their first aid level of qualification, whether or not the user is active, okay, their login. And we're also going to keep a list of strings here, the names of their different user roles from the identity system. You'll see how that ties in as we go on, but it makes sense that we track that right here inside this view model. Okay, all right, good. So far, so good. Now, I'm going to add a utility. This isn't really necessary, but at some point, the admin is going to create this employee. And at the same time, in parallel, we're going to create the identity user record in the identity system. You have to give a password as you do so. We could just have a stock password we use, but that's not the most secure approach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little utility class here in the utility folder. I'm going to call it, well, what am I going to call it? Make password, right? Okay, so let me just grab the code here. And, this isn't the be all and end all, but, basically, this is the kind of thing I've done before with, the need to be able to randomly pull characters out and put them together. I've done this kind of coding for things like product numbers and so on and so forth. So it can work here as well. Let me just kind of point out one thing. Way down here in Program CS, when we were configuring the identity system, here are the allowed username characters we defined, right? So these are all the ones you're allowed to use, okay? So I figured, well, that's a good set of characters to follow. So you see I broke it down here. These are the uppercase ones, the lowercase, the digits, and the alphanumeric characters. So those are right out of that list, right? Then all characters, of course, is putting them all together at once. So basically what we do is we randomly select one of the uppercase, one of the lowercase, one of the digits, and one of the non-alphanumeric characters. Those are the first four characters making it the password. Then we just randomly select after that, right? So it's just one way to generate. Notice it's a static class. We can just call it and call the generate method. We can specify how many characters we want, right? You'll always have a minimum of 4, but you can add as many characters as you want after that. That should satisfy the need of most systems to have, that mixture of uppercase, lowercase, et cetera, et cetera. Might as well do before going forward. In order to properly use our view model classes to present the employee information in different ways to either the admin or the user themselves, well, guess what? As we said, it's very much kind of like using a DTO for a slightly different purpose. So I'm going to install my favorite lazy tool when it comes to copying data back and forth between similar classes. So I'm going to come in here and we're going to install my mapping generator. Just to get ready for going forward. Okay, so I've got that in place. We have our view models. I have my little password generator. All right, let's actually get started now on the controllers involved. So I'm just going to do a quick build, make sure that everything is hunky-dory. I'm going to close everything up, and let's go up to controllers. Now, truth is, this controller, I could scaffold this based on my employee view model itself, and that would get me half the way there at least. But the only problem is, or actually I should say the employee class itself I could use for this one. Only thing is that I'm going to probably end up taking out almost as much code as I would be adding. So I'm going to start with an empty controller. And it's similar enough to all the controllers we've done before that it's really not a big deal. I'm just going to call it employee controller. And we'll just start from scratch here. All right. Now, in terms of a controller, though, really, this employee controller is going to pull together a lot of the functionality that we've done in other areas. Like, for example, our user role controller. Remember here we had our application DB context and our user manager, okay, that we brought in so that we could manipulate the different identity users and what roles they were assigned and so on and so forth, okay? And of course, it's similar as well to, pretty much any one of our other controllers, whereas of course, we need our DB context and so on and so forth. So in the end, what I find is for this dedicated employee controller, I end up needing a few things. I end up needing not only our medical office context, okay, I need my application DB context because we need to work with the identity system, the objects in there directly. I'm going to also have my email sender because we might want to be able to send an email to the user to let them know about, hey, you can come and register here, change your password, whatever. And of course, we'll also need the user manager. So I end up with all 4 of these, But something else very important I almost forgot to do, but I want to get in place right away is my authorization. I'm going to authorize that the only people who can come in here are my admin. Because it's only the admin that should be able to come in here and actually create and maintain the employees themselves, right? Now, I might as well, take advantage of our nice, smart, cognizant controller as well, so that I can use that for the automatic naming of things and so on. So I've got my employee there. Now, of course, I need a constructor to actually get from dependency injection all of these items that I require here. So there we go. There's our typical instructor, employee controller. I have my medical office context, the application DB context, so I can work with both my databases, right? My email sender and my user manager as well. Okay. Now for the index action, okay, itself, here I'm going to start off with, well, for one thing, I'm going to make it async. And task. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull data from employees to return, right? So my employees, I'm going to include, okay, the subscriptions, just planning ahead. But I'm going to select into, okay, very much like using a DTO, my employee admin view model objects, right? Because this is for the admin to work with the employees, right? And then that's what I'll be returning to the view is this collection of employees. So what goes in here? Well, we've used this mapping generator before. I'll initialize with local variables, right? So that's what I get. I get my email, the prescriber status, the first aid level, whether they're active or not. I could rearrange the order of these if I wanted to, but hey, they're all there. That's all that really counts as far as I'm concerned. Okay, now a bit of extra logic, just to be sure, is I'm going to also add all their roles, right? Remember we set up that collection of strings, the names of each role, okay? So I want to add that into each employee as well. So now that I've got it from the actual database, what roles they're in, well, that's stored in a separate system. That's stored in the identity system. That's why we added our user manager. So I go and I get them, but then I loop through each employee, find them in the identity system, and use the get roles async, which returns what? It returns a I list of strings, the names of each role, right? So I just cast that as a list, and I store that in my user roles that we created earlier. That's a list of strings in our view model object. So that's all the information about what roles the user is in. Then I'm ready to return view and actually display it. Okay? All right, well, maybe we'll go ahead and we'll build the index itself next. So to do that, I can just come here, I can right click and say add view. So it'll be a razor view. View name is index, and you know what, I'll just leave it empty. Okay, that's perfectly fine. It might have saved some time if I'd selected the employee, but again, I'd be changing code almost as much as I would be adding code. So I'll just let it go ahead and build it. All right. So I'm kind of jumping ahead here, implementing our good practices. See, there's my view heading, taking advantage of my cognizant controller, right? I have up here some temp data to show a message. We'll talk more about that later on. So basically, we just have our normal arrangement, a table where I'm showing the summary, the phone, the first aid status, the prescriber, true or false, a list of the user roles, and whether or not they're active, right? All the key information the admin needs to know about the employee, okay? And, sorry. So I'm once again putting a create button above the column where I have the edit and so on as well, right? Then as we loop through each employee, each item in our model, okay, I'm going to show the summary with a BR tag. So right below it, I'll show the email, right? This is for display. Show the phone number, the first aid level of certification they have. a checkbox input here for their prescriber status, if they're allowed to write prescriptions and things like that. And then a simple list of user roles, just with a BR tag between each one, right? Okay, then we have our input for the disabled, okay? For the active or not. So that allows the user to see, the admin user to see if this person is active, and away we go. All right, finally we have our edit button, and we're going to actually have some code in place for our subscriptions as well. If they have the number of push subscriptions is greater than 0, then we're going to actually have a button here where they can actually send a notification directly to the user as long as they're actually subscribed to anything. So that's all part of the index itself. So let's just actually run it. I don't have it, well, maybe I should do that first. I might as well add the link, right? Of course, the link to get to this controller, I'm going to come down here to Views, Shared in our layout. That's where our main menu system is. And if we come down here, if you remember how we set this up, we said if the user is in admin, so these are links that are only visible to the admin. All these ones are for either an admin or a supervisor, but down here is just the admin. Now this is the controller we had from last term, our user role controller, right? And that was the one where we could go in and we could see what roles the user was in, and we could edit and assign them to other roles in addition and so on. Well, the truth is our new and improved employee controller here will take care of all that. So we no longer even technically need that user role controller anymore. So I can steal this spot in the menu system easily, right? So I'll make it my employee. And maybe I'll say maintain employees. Okay, let's give her a run. The excitement builds. Okay, go, of course, go open on the other screen. All right. Now, don't worry, later on we'll get rid of the register link. We won't need that anymore, but I'll log in right now as admin. So in the menu here is my maintain employees. Hopefully this goes okay. There we go. So we have our 3 employees that we seated in, Gregory House, Fred Flintstone, etc., right? The emails we can see here right now. So they haven't filled out their phone numbers. We don't have anything here for prescriber per se. That's just the way the default values are. Notice our roles are here though. Now, of course, my create and edit is not available yet. I could click on it, but it's not going to go anywhere. I haven't actually added those actions to the controller. But at least we see that it's actually up and running now, and that's the kind of information that the admin user would be presented about the actual employees. Then we just have to get the coding in place so they can create an employee, edit an employee, etc., right? Okay, good. All right, well, maybe I'll stop the recording at this point, and because it's getting pretty long, and we'll come back in and we'll add the rest of the functionality for the employee in a minute.